Hello everyone. So as Dr. Miller just said, my name is Emily. I'm a senior here at UR. I'm majoring in International Studies and Spanish with a minor in Women and Gender Studies. And for my summer fellowship, I was in Cuenca, Ecuador. My faculty mentor was Dr. Olivier Delairs in the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures. So first off, I just want to give a big thank you to the CCU staff for not just organizing this event, but for all the support throughout the summer. I had one of the most amazing summers of my life, and I think this is a really unique program, and it couldn't have worked out more perfectly and complemented the work that I was doing there. So huge thank you just to start off. And we'll get into it. So to provide a little bit of background, I was working for Education USA, which for those of you who don't know is an initiative of the US State Department to provide prospective international students with free, unbiased information about American colleges and universities. So in short, it's kind of a government-backed college counseling service with a network of centers all over the world. In Ecuador, there are 3 centers. There's one in Guayaquil, one in Quito, and one in Cuenca. So I was at the center in Cuenca, which is housed in CDI, which is the Center for Inter-American Studies. And the executive director of CDI is actually a UR alum. His name is Mark Odenwalder. So it was kind of a really unique experience to sort of hear a story, how he ended up running a nonprofit in Ecuador. And the Inter-American Studies is really kind of an organization to promote cross-cultural exchange between Ecuadorians and Americans through English classes, Spanish classes, and joint research projects. So it's a really amazing organization. I was the first intern in the Education USA office, which you can see. It's a beautiful building right there. It's beautiful, but it's very old, and we always worried if there's like an earthquake, it was not the best place to be because it was under a lot of construction, but it was a beautiful building. And I was responsible for organizing a personal essay writing workshop, an English conversation club based on American university culture. And I was also a counselor to Opportunity Fund students, which are students that have a scholarship that covers all of their application costs. So SAT testing, additional English classes, application fees, visa application fees, it's all covered for them, and they get extra guidance throughout the process. So that was a really amazing initiative to be part of as well. So to kind of touch on the academic component of my fellowship, so I talked to my mentor, Dr. Delairs, before I went to Ecuador. He encouraged me to investigate literature on interculturality, which has become a framework kind of among Western academics for understanding, accommodating, and celebrating multiple cultures. So it establishes techniques and practices to encourage connections and understanding among cultures in order to benefit multicultural groups, institutions, and societies. So the goal of my academic research was to sort of allow interculturality to inform how I worked with my students in Ecuador. However, as I started investigating both Spanish and English literature on the topic of interculturality, it became apparent that Interculturalidad, which is the Spanish translation of interculturality, does not mean the same thing. In Ecuador and throughout other Latin American cultures, interculturalidad has a much more political interpretation. It's used by many indigenous communities as a plea for cultural legitimacy, and it tends to stand more for decolonization and the resistance of Western hegemonic power as opposed to kind of mutual cultural interaction. So while the EU will publish literature on using sort of language links around the world to promote cultural understanding, in Latin American countries, interculturalidad is sort of seen as throwing over that colonial dominance, that layer that was imposed on them in the first place. So that was a very interesting finding that then informed a lot of my work in Ecuador. So in practice, interculturalidad has become a political priority in Ecuador when Rafael Correa assumed the presidency in 2007. So he brought sweeping reforms to Ecuadorian society, including to its education system. He raised teaching standards, and he also instituted what are called millennial schools in rural areas. And these were originally designed to provide intercultural bilingual education that would match the standards of the schools already active in urban areas. However, these reforms affected indigenous communities whose local schools were knocked down to make way for new, larger schools that were often too far away for many students to access. And furthermore, these schools were sort of intended to be sensitive to local cultures, but the curriculums tend to reproduce mestizo or Hispanicized culture and treat indigenous cultures as a romanticized other, sort of as a folklore rather than a legitimate way of life. So these students end up learning Quechua and other indigenous languages as kind of their foreign language, and have a Spanish curriculum as the norm. The shortcoming in this new education system could also be tied to the lack of graduate degree programs and research opportunities throughout Ecuador. So although the government now requires nearly all college professors to obtain a graduate level degree, there really are few graduate programs available in Ecuador, and in fact there's no graduate degree program in education at any Ecuadorian university. So there's sort of a deficit of Ecuadorians, especially in the education sector, who have advanced degrees, who are really empowered to address these local problems. So many Ecuadorian students do seek degrees abroad, either in the US or Europe. And for those students, Education USA is an invaluable resource to many of these students. However, its network is also limited. It's limited to urban centers and also to students who speak English and Spanish. They don't offer materials in any other language. So kind of how Interculturalidad informed my work and also my home life in Ecuador. I will admit at first it was a little difficult to sort of apply the academic theory to the work I was doing every day, especially being an outsider in a nonprofit in a foreign country. You kind of feel like you're making a subject out of your colleagues and the students that you're working with, as opposed to really applying practical knowledge to your work, and kind of my primary goal, which was helping my students get into college, and they were equally worried about that as I was at their age, so that was sort of my primary goal at the end of the day. And I was also, wanted to live up to my supervisor's expectations for the work that I was providing. And then there's also the reality of working in a nonprofit organization like CDI, where, as kind of Mark told me, he's like, no one's really making enough, and it's kind of just the price you pay to be in a more accepting, multicultural community that is really aimed towards kind of beneficial goals, as opposed to making large profits. And Cuenca itself is also a pretty affluent city with a large expat community. So most of the students I worked with were pretty well prepared for college. They just really needed help decoding kind of the culturally relevant college application process that American students are so used to growing up in our school system. However, at home, I did see Interculturalidad come into play, especially regarding kind of traditional attitudes towards race and gender. So while I had a wonderful relationship with my host mother, she has studied sociology and gender studies in college, but I saw her kind of producing a lot of gender roles with her son and her daughter at home, as well as kind of speaking down to the maid in the household who was from an indigenous community. And we were kind of prepared to observe that, but it was a reality of kind of life in Cuenca, especially kind of a larger urban center that indigenous communities have kind of moved into in order to get jobs. But I did sort of have some critical takeaways from sort of the combination of my academic work and the practical work that I was doing at Education USA. So I think it was a unique challenge balancing both the academic and practical sides of my fellowship. But what I really learned was that Ecuador is at a critical moment in its history. I think they've already made sweeping changes to address extreme poverty and to improve their education system and public services. However, these changes may leave behind several communities if there's not an effort made to truly legitimize indigenous cultures and their ways of life. Furthermore, Ecuador has a population that's really hungry and motivated to solve its challenges. And nearly all of my students showed a desire not just to study abroad and to gain degrees, but to come back to Ecuador and to become professionals in their field in Ecuador, or professors, or establish research centers and contribute to society. And I think as an American college student, it was a really refreshing perspective to see students who weren't just worried about their own ambitions, but really how their work and how their work abroad can inform what they contribute to Ecuadorian society. So if I kind of had to establish maybe some goals for Education USA, kind of Western academics, academia, and for myself, certainly Education USA I think is an amazing service and kind of like one of the best things our State Department is doing at the moment. But I would love to see them expand that network and also expand sort of the materials and services they provide to include more students, especially students that don't speak English or Spanish, and students that might be harder to reach in more rural areas. I think Western academia could really do a better job sort of breaking down the politics behind interculturality and interculturalidad and understanding this dynamic and seeing if there's a way to kind of bridge those interpretations of identity and multiculturalism. And kind of goals for myself, I think this fellowship just really taught me once again to just listen and observe even more than I do, to sort of never assume things about any place or any culture that I encounter, to keep an open mind, and also to recognize what I have to offer kind of up against what I still have to learn. So really what I had to offer, I think, in this fellowship was experience being a writing consultant and sort of knowledge of the college application process, but the rest I was really learning a lot from my students as well in terms of what they wanted, what their goals were, and how I could best help them. And had to include, some of my pictures got cut off. Okay, I had a lot more pictures, but I just want to say many of my students and colleagues in Ecuador became some of my dearest friends. I'm still in contact with all of them. I'm really eternally grateful to them for showing me their beautiful country. It really is an amazing place if you guys ever get the chance to go. But while I'm passionate about traveling, getting to know other cultures, I am equally passionate about the challenging and rewarding work that American universities offer. And I truly believe that those who are passionate about making a change in the world should have access to the resources and the institutions and the networks that will help them to do so. So I think it's become a lifelong goal of mine to sort of help bridge this gap and really promote quality and inclusive education worldwide. So that's, yeah, that's from Kuwait.